All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle a huge question in economics today. Why is it that some of the smartest people on the planet can look at the same economy and disagree, like, completely? Well, the answer is hiding in a deep, fundamental divide that shapes pretty much every economic argument you'll ever hear.
I mean, you've seen this, right? You turn on the news and there are two super smart economists, maybe even Nobel Prize winners, looking at the exact same set of numbers, and they come to totally opposite conclusions about what we should do. It's baffling. How is that even possible?
You might think the answer is buried in some complex new data or a fancy algorithm, but nope. The key to cracking this whole puzzle actually comes from way back. We're talking about a philosophical idea from the 1700s that basically drew a line in the sand for all of modern economics. And here it is. It's called Hume's Guillotine, named for the philosopher David Hume. And I want you to literally picture a guillotine, a sharp blade, because it's all about making one clean, decisive cut between two totally different kinds of statements. The idea itself is actually pretty simple, but it is incredibly powerful. At its core, Hume's guillotine just slices right between statements of fact, things that are, and statements of value, things that we think should be. Let's break that down a little more. So first up, on one side of the blade, we've got is statements. These are purely descriptive. They're all about facts, data, things you can observe and measure. They just state what is. You know, a statement like the current unemployment rate is 6%. That's a claim we can actually go and check. Now, on the other side of that cut, you have ought statements. These are prescriptive. They're not about facts, they're about values, opinions, and what somebody thinks should happen. For instance, the government ought to do more to reduce unemployment. See the difference? That's not a fact, it's a goal. It's a value judgment.
Okay, so what does some 18th century philosopher's idea have to do with the economy today? Well, economists loved this distinction so much that they basically adopted it and gave it their own fancy labels, positive and normative economics. And it's a direct one-to-one mapping. Those factual is statements, that's what economists call positive economics. And all those value-based ought statements, that's the world of normative economics. It's the exact same divide, just with different names.
So let's make that clear. Positive economics is the sciencey part. It's objective. It's all about cause and effect, and it has to be testable with data. A positive statement doesn't care if something is good or bad. It just describes what the evidence shows is happening. It's about reality.
Normative economics, though, that's where things get, well, personal. It's subjective. This is where opinions and values and beliefs come crashing into the party. A normative statement is a recommendation. It's a judgment call. And you can't prove it right or wrong with just data, because it all starts with a belief about what's important.
This table here just sums it all up perfectly. You've got positive economics over here. It's objective, you can test it with data, and it's all about what is. And then you've got normative economics, subjective, based on values, and all about what should be. Keeping these two in their separate lanes is absolutely crucial. All right, enough theory. Let's see how this whole thing plays out in the real world. And honestly, there is no better example than the fiery, never-ending debate over the minimum wage. Okay, listen to that question. You hear that magic word, should. That word is a huge flashing sign that we are firmly in normative territory. The question isn't just asking for facts. It's asking if we should pursue a specific, value-based goal, improving people's lives. And here's exactly how you'll hear this stuff in the actual debate. The positive statement makes a claim that we can, in theory, go out and test. We can look at the data and see if raising the minimum wage is linked to teenage unemployment. But the normative statement? It's a recommendation. It's based on the belief that fighting poverty is a good goal for the government to have. Now check this out. This is a pure 100% positive statement pulled right from the data. This graph is just showing us the value of the minimum wage over time. And that little sentence at the bottom is just a cold, hard fact. It simply tells us what the data shows, no judgment, no opinion. And that's the whole point right there. That fact, that piece of data, doesn't tell us what to do. It doesn't say the wage should be higher or should be lower. It's just a starting point. The big, messy argument over what to do next, well, that's where normative economics completely takes over. So this brings us to a really useful way to think about what economists actually do. You can picture them as wearing two totally different hats, and which hat they have on at any given moment completely changes what they're going to say. So how can you spot the difference yourself? Here's your little toolkit. When you hear someone make an economic claim, just run it through these 3 checks. First, listen for those keywords: should, ought, must. Second, ask yourself, hey, could I actually test this with data? And third, ask, is there a value judgment baked into this? This will tell you which hat they're wearing. And here are the two hats. When an economist puts on their scientist hat, they're in positive territory. They're just describing how the economy works, like a mechanic explaining an engine. But when they swap it for the policy advisor hat, they're suddenly making normative statements. They're recommending which way we should turn the car based on where they think we ought to go. And this is the solution to our big puzzle from the beginning. Why do smart economists disagree? Often, it's not because their facts are different. It's because they're wearing different hats. One is speaking as a scientist, just describing a trade-off, while the other is speaking as an advisor, arguing for an outcome they believe is best. Spotting that switch is everything.
So we'll leave you with this one question. The next time you're listening to the news or reading an article about the economy, just pause and ask yourself, am I hearing a fact about how the world is, or am I hearing a belief about how the world ought to be? Once you can tell the difference, you'll understand everything.